When you think about cannibal films, do you think of exploitation films like Cannibal Holocaust? Or maybe incestuous clan films like Wrong Turn? Or maybe for the younger generation, you think of young love like in Bones and All? We're back, people. Life has chewed me up and spit me out a bit more since the last video I made, but we're back. And I would like to continue making these videos if there are at least a couple people out there willing to watch them. My name is Lacey. I love horror and anything involving horror, as well as anything horror adjacent. If you enjoy this video, I would love it if you would like, subscribe, comment, all of the good stuff. I have a Discord that's free to join. I would love to see people in there. And in order to access that, you can just use my link tree that is in my profile. All right, I'm done begging for attention now. I wanted to preface this video by saying I do know there is a difference between romance and romanticizing something. Romance obviously involves love, non-platonic relationships, whereas romanticizing something is using a different range of ways to make something seem not as bad as it actually is. So I do know the difference between romanticizing and romance, but what better tool than romance can be used to romanticize anything? So, before we get into how modern films have begun to romanticize the eating of individuals, we need to start with how cannibalism used to be viewed in film before slowly adding it to mainstream horror. Cannibalism in general used to be viewed as something horrific and taboo for most of civilization. When depicted in film, you likely knew what type of film you'd be watching going into it. In films like the before mentioned controversial film Cannibal Holocaust or the somewhat more recently made Bone Tomahawk, they both show cannibalism as being a depiction of primal and primitive barbaric tribes. And both films actually have somewhat worse scenes when it comes to human cruelty. In Cannibal Holocaust, it's the documentary crew that showcases some of the worst acts, and some might say they deserve their fate. And the troglodytes in Bone Tomahawk are shown as almost more beast than man, communicating in a series of grunts. There actually are some modern tribes that have been known to eat the dead as funeral rites, so the spirit can continue to live on in the living once consumed. Unfortunately, some killers known for cannibalizing their victims are known to have done it for the same reasons. For example, Jeffrey Dahmer. I know you didn't really expect a cannibal video to not talk about the cannibal of Milwaukee, right? Stated in an interview that he started to consume parts of his victims to take part of them into him forever. That just sounds about as horrible as you'd imagine, but doesn't that add a bit of messed up romance into the equation already? When talking about tribes being cannibals, it's hard not to include incestuous family clans who do the same. The main example of this is the legend of Sonny Bean and his clan, who supposedly killed and ate up to 1,000 people over a 25-year span before discovery. He and his wife lived in a cave in Scotland and had 14 children who are said to have incestuously bared 32 grandchildren. Of course, there's a lot of speculation on if Sonny Bean or his clan even existed. There was a butcher in Scotland named Christy Cleek who draws a lot of parallels and comparisons. Wes Craven drew inspiration from Sonny Bean for the cannibal family in his 1977 film The Hills Have Eyes. He was, of course, also inspired by the family in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And of course, you can't talk incest cannibal family without mentioning Wrong Turn, which is an entire franchise at this point. The one other film that's at least a little more recent that I'd like to mention is 2013's We Are What We Are, where a family of religious cannibals lose the family matriarch to Kuru disease, which is said to be caused by the consumption of human remains, which was common for the four people of Papua New Guinea who performed funerary cannibalism. After their crazed father alludes to possible incestuous ideations, they escape by attacking him with their teeth and biting important chunks off. Another often seen trope that gets paired with people eating is dystopian futures. The world isn't the place it is now. The best way to treat overpopulation starvation is to feed them to themselves, like in 1973's Soylent Green. Post-apocalyptic films showcase cannibalistic marauders who use the opportunity to make a statement or create bloodbaths. The story of Cloud Atlas has cannibalism strewn throughout at different time periods in different countries. Another trope we often see paired with people eating is revenge being served cooked. A great example of this is the Frey pie on Game of Thrones, when Walter Frey is served his sons in a meat pie by Arya Stark as revenge for the Red Wedding, where her brother and mother were betrayed and murdered. She then reveals herself and slits his throat. Then you have Sweeney Todd and Mrs. Lovett, who start a killing spree where he murders London citizens, and then she feeds them to other unsuspecting London citizens, all out of revenge for London being a not so great place back in the early 1800s. I have never eaten a meat pie, nor do I plan to at this point. Another example is when Cartman in South Park overreacts to being conned out of $10. He puts the guy's parents in a chili and tricks him into eating it. It's really messed up, honestly. The most heartbreaking and rooted in reality is the cannibalism out of desperation situation. Starvation can lead even the most good hearted person to consuming human meat. We unfortunately have more than one real world example of this. Some of the most well known are the Donner Party, a group of pioneers who found themselves snowbound in the Sierra Nevada in 1846, or the Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571, where a rugby team's plane crashed in the Andes Mountains in 1972, or even Franklin's lost expedition of the Northwest Passage, where the Erebus and the Terror, two British ships, became icebound in 1848. In most of these situations, the human remains that were consumed had already passed and weren't killed in order to be consumed. I'd of course like to mention that this tragedy also ties in with some indigenous folklore as well, as the Wendigo, an evil spirit said to possess humans who have resourced to cannibalism for survival. They're said to be humanoid creatures cursed with insatiable hunger. I had to mention that since I'm a cryptid girly. Another small branch of cannibalism in film I want to touch on is cannibalism out of an attempt to consume and absorb youth and beauty. In the 2019 film The Neon Demon, three women murder a young and more beautiful new model who has success at their expense. They bathe in her blood, which was directly inspired by the legend of Countess Elizabeth Bathory, who was said to have killed and bathed in hundreds of young women's blood in an attempt to regain and sustain her youth. The women in the Neon Demon also cannibalized the younger woman's body, seemingly for the same reason. Before we get to the true romanticism of cannibalism, we have to look at another trope, which is human meat being seen as a delicacy. The rich eating the poor seemed a perfect effect in Hannibal, the TV show and the movie. In the show, we see Hannibal cooking these elaborate meals for his lavish dinner parties. In the decisively mid 2001 film, Hannibal cooks and feeds Clarice's douche coworker his own brain, almost as a way to fight for her honor. That's sweet of him, right? Another great modern example is 2022's Fresh, where a man dates women in order to kidnap them and harvest their meat for rich patrons online. He keeps them alive and harvests them piece by piece. He even uses the women's photos and personal info as marketing tools. He has a wife who is seen with a prosthetic leg, implying she started as one of his victims. This leads to his downfall as our brave female protagonist feigns interest in trying human meat and successfully seduces him in order to kill him and escape, which brings in some twisted romance in with the brutality of cannibalism. You can't tell me that seeing Sebastian Stan dance this way doesn't make you want a piece of that meat. One of the examples of romantic or at least sexy cannibalism is Jennifer's Body. While I feel like technically Jennifer isn't human anymore, she's a succubus. Most people still consider her to be partaking in cannibalism. Most times when she does it, it's a very carnal time, usually involving intercourse, or at least she seduces the guys before eating them. Each time Jennifer feeds, she looks great and vibrant. If I could look like Megan Fox, would I be willing to eat man meat? I adore this movie, and if you want me to do a deep dive, let me know. I'd love it. Another film that I like to consider recent, but actually came out 10 years ago, is Raw. This is one of the main films that I feel is guilty of romanticizing cannibalism. While the film is in no way romantic, it does depict an odd family dynamic in which awful things happen when a vegetarian named Justine joins the same veterinary school that her older sister Alexia attends, and where their parents actually met. During a hazing ritual, the new students are made to crawl on all fours like animals, have buckets of blood poured over their heads, and have to eat raw rabbit kidneys. Justine fights this, but is ultimately forced by Alexia, which is kind of a big deal when you find out what a domino effect this causes in Justine's life, which is likely the same thing that Alexia likely went through. Justine develops a rash and she starts to crave meat, which progresses to raw chicken meat and causes her to eventually throw up as her body rejects it. She eventually ends up eating her older sister's finger while she's passed out during a bikini wax gone wrong. Alexia witnesses this but lies to their parents afterwards. The next day, she takes Justine to a deserted road and causes a car accident to occur before beginning to consume the victims. Justine is disgusted by her sister's behavior, but she still wants that people meat. While having sex with Adrian, her love interest, she wants to bite him but instead bites her own arm, which seems romantic in another twisted way. Eventually, Justine wakes up to a dead and partially consumed Adrian. She soon finds her sister in the next room, also covered in blood. Justine is mad at first, but cleans them both up. Alexia goes to jail for Adrian's murder, and Justine goes back home to her parents. It's there that she discovers that her mom suffers the same cannibalistic affliction that Alexia and Justine suffer from. Her dad is covered in bite marks and scars because of it, but he loves her anyways. Aw, that's healthy. Now, the one true recently made film I feel like embodies romantic cannibalism is Bones and All. While the screenplay was adapted from a 2015 novel by Camille DeAngelis, it was made into a film in 2022 starring Taylor Russell and Timothy Chalamet. Both are young cannibals, and it's alluded to that they also aren't exactly human, called eaters. They're definitely human adjacent, though. In the film, Marin, a teenager in 1988 in Virginia, sneaks out to a sleepover where she ends up biting a girl's finger almost off. She runs home where her dad quickly gathers them both up and moves to Maryland. On the day she turns 18, her dad abandons her. He leaves her a voice tape where he explains that her first people eating episode happened when she killed her babysitter when she was 5. He's been cleaning up her messes and running with her ever since. But because she never felt guilty afterwards, he was disturbed and couldn't stay with her any longer. She decides to head to Minnesota, where she knows her mother was born. On the way, a creepy guy who also eats people finds her and takes her to an elderly woman's house where they eat after she passes. The guy's name is Sully, and due to him being a weird old man, she flees afterwards. Then she continues her journey to Minnesota, and while stealing from a store, she runs into a guy named Lee. They both smell that the other is also an eater, so she goes with him. They kind of fall in love, and it's adorable, I'm not gonna lie. And he agrees to drive her to Minnesota to find her mom. They run into a couple fellow eaters, but then Marin finds out that one of them isn't an eater, where he suffers from the cravings, but he actually chooses to eat the meat. But the other guy who is an eater does talk about eating everything within the body, bones and all, and how it's almost a rite of passage. Eventually, Marin tells Lee that she's hungry, so he kills a guy for them to feed on. They find out afterwards that he had a wife and child, so Marin gets upset.
Or I guess she's upset about not being upset.
They make it to Minnesota and find out Marin's mom is in a psychiatric hospital and she ate her own hands. Apparently, she decided if Marin ever came to see her, she would try to kill her to save her from being in a world where monsters don't belong. Marin leaves Lee, who heads home, hoping she'll look for him there. After leaving, Marin runs into Sully, who followed her to Minnesota all the way from Ohio. She regrets him, he freaks out, and Marin heads to Kentucky to find Lee. She talks to his sister, and she explains that their father was an alcoholic who hit her and Lee. Lee told her to go get the cops, and their father had disappeared. After reuniting with Lee, he tells her that his father was also an eater and he tried to feed on Lee. So instead, he ate his dad, which is a little more traumatic than even Marin went through, to be honest. She tells him she loves him and they decide to just be people for a while. But of course, Sully tracks them down and threatens Marin with a knife. Lee saves her but gets stabbed in the lung in the process. They discover that Sully killed and ate Lee's sister, and before Lee dies, he begs Marin to eat him, bones and all. So in a romantic but horrible show of love, she does. It's so sad, but makes you want that kind of love, in a young adult novel kind of way, and minimalizes the horrific gore these two young, attractive people caused and partook in, and the story becomes a tragic love story. See how we went from exploitation film to a chick flick adjacent film? And how does cannibalism feel to you at this point? Obviously, way less terrible than before, at least in my opinion. I'm not saying eating people in reality is a good idea. I'm saying seeing it depicted in film has a way less visceral reaction when watching young, attractive people do it. So thanks, Hollywood. Way to mainstream desensitize everyone. And that's all I have for this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Join my Discord. Give me some comments. If there's a trope, a film, a book, a game, anything you think I should cover, drop it in the comments. I love getting recommendations. But anyways, that's all for me. I'm Lacey, and as always, I'll be here for what scares you. Bye.
What have you been eating?
Them? But, like, they were fresh, and it was mainly the butts.
Frank fed us human meat, and we got the hunger.
The hunger?
Mm-hmm. That's how you become a cannibal, D.
Hey, I'm in a bind. I need your help.
That's what friends are for.
Well, friends might be a bit of a stretch. I mean, you're a cannibal that ate 6 people.
9.5.
Yep, worse.